Right.
And then I'll share the screen and then we'll be good to go.
Okay.
Et maintenant, c'est la valse. 1, 2, 3. Et maintenant, c'est la valse. 1, 2, 3.
Just a couple more minutes, Jerry, and we'll go.
Yep.
And for those that are watching, this is just music while we're waiting, but it shows Frankenthaler's famous methodology of staining vibrant colors into unprimed canvases, which he called soak and stain, which we're going to look at, but considered one of the most important innovations in modern art. And it's illustrated in a painting we're going to look at called The Mountains and Sea, that she did when she was only 24 using this technique.
I think this is just the.
Ça veut dire silence.
Okay. Jerry, you think we're ready?
I think we're ready.
Et maintenant, c'est la valse.
Okay, better stop it before she
Yep.
goes again. You know the French.
Et maintenant,
Yep.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. We were listening there to Homage to Helen Frankenthaler. And now we're going to begin the fourth in a series of presentations on Jewish artists, outsized influence and impact on American modern art. We looked at Ben Shahn, Mark Rothko, Louise Nevelson, and now Helen Frankenthaler. And I think that if nothing else, the images that we'll all see on this presentation are glorious. And I'm amazed, having gone through this, how true to her instincts creatively, whatever different mediums she used, was Helen Frankenthaler, and just such a sense of of beauty. So let's start, and we're going to go to May 1951. And you had a group of artists in downtown New York that were later called the Irascibles. They included Franz Klein and Jackson Pollock and William de Kooning and Arshile Gorky as the and Bob Mother, and others, as well as a young generation called the second generation of the New York School of Artists. But there they were really denied admission to the galleries uptown. So they were downtowners, and they all of a sudden saw on 9th Street on this day in May that there was a derelict space that seemed to be available perhaps for an exhibition, and they decided to have one. The problem was they had no money. They had nobody that knew how to mount an exhibition other than one guy, one of the artists who raised his hand, Milton Resnick. Next slide, Jerry. How you doing, Jerry?
I'm doing fine,
There you
David.
go.
It works some of the time.
It's all right. You're the best. So Milton Resnick, made his studio available. This group of artists love to congregate, drink, dance, shout, philosophize, and talk art. And Milton's girlfriend said, well, I have $50. Let's see if the landlord will take it for a month. He did. So they decided now they needed to organize. They had nobody to do it until a little guy named Leo Castelli shows up. He had just come from overseas, escaping the Nazis. He'd had some experience in hanging art, in limited experience in being a gallerist, and he was pressed into service. His pay was that he got a painting from everybody, which, as it turns out, was a very good deal for him, and probably contributed to launching his business in New York. But in any event, off they went. They got it all cleaned up. He organized it. Everybody, all 72 artists were entitled to hang one painting. There were 5 women, and those 5 women are the subject of a fabulous book, which you need 2 lifetimes to finish, but I did, called 9th Street Women. And they were Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan, Joan Mitchell, and our own Helen Frankenthaler, the youngest artist in the whole group at age 22, fresh out of Bennington College. And this group mounted this exhibition. They all were seen trudging across avenues with big paintings to hang on the walls. Guess who hung the largest painting? Her first exhibition, really unknown to this group, but Helen Frankenthaler hangs the largest piece, 8 by 6. Next slide, Jerry. Which is this one. It's now in the Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, but that was her painting. And she is coming from college. Paul Feely is one of her teachers in high school at the Dalton School. Her teacher was none other than Rufino Tamayo. And, there were major Cubists, Surrealists. There's Miro and Kandinsky and Picasso. They're all in there. And that was her painting. The show was an incredible success. Taxis were lined up around the block. People came from all over the city to see this show. And sure enough, in the show were those that were going to become the greatest artists in American history. So in the end, terrific success. And Helen Frankenthaler is known. Who would have known that 2 years from then, she would paint one of the most iconic paintings in American modern art history, called Mountains and Sea, which we're going to talk about. And who would have imagined that 10 years from then, she would have become the youngest person to have a full retrospective at the Jewish Museum in 1960. So an extraordinary trajectory. Let's take a look at it. Let's begin first to learn a little bit more about the history of this young woman who was about to turn the art world upside down. Next, Jared.
How, as soon as it works, David.
Okay. There's a video, not that one.
Helen Frankenthaler, longtime
Not that
Darien
one.
resident, pioneered the technique.
Oh, I guess, no, he's later. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Helen Frankenthaler, longtime Darien resident, pioneered the technique of staining unprimed canvas with thinned oil paint, creating bold fields of color. Frankenthaler, an abstract expressionist, has been a prolific painter and printmaker for nearly 60 years. Her works have been shown in the most prestigious galleries and museums worldwide. Frankenthaler first leased a studio in Stamford, Connecticut during the early 1970s and has maintained a residence in Connecticut for nearly 3 decades. Born on December 12, 1928 in New York City, Helen Frankenthaler was the youngest of 3 daughters of parents Alfred Frankenthaler, a New York Supreme Court justice, and his wife, Martha Lowenstein.
My father thought I was special from the day I was born. And as a result, I guess I felt special and somehow became what he projected onto me, which was special.
Frankenthaler's long artistic career began as a teenager at the Dalton School and continued under the tutelage of Paul Feely at Bennington College.
Bennington really saved my life because they took me seriously. And anything you wanted to try, if you were serious and inventive and a risk taker, was possible. I mean, it was way out.
It was at Bennington that Frankenthaler became an experienced student of Cubism.
For me, learning Cubism was the greatest freedom and exercise, really analyzing what Cubism was about.
After graduation from Bennington, Frankenthaler returned to New York City, where she rented studio space and embarked on life as an artist. Through her friendship with art critic Clement Greenberg, Frankenthaler met Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, Willem and Elaine de Kooning, and longtime friend David Smith. Eager to find a unique artistic style, Frankenthaler departed from the rigidity of Cubism and joined the New York School, a revolutionary art movement that was challenging all traditional ways of thinking about and creating art.
The New York School took painting to a whole other level. It expanded the boundaries of what a work of art could be. It took painting from the easel, from the wall, put it on the floor, and expanded one's whole perception of what it meant to be an artist. The movement, the activity was part of the painting, and you were not only making the painting, you were in the painting. You were involved intimately in the process.
In 1951, Jackson Pollock shook the art world with his innovative drip paintings.
I remember going up in the elevator to the Betty Parsons Gallery, and my heart was pounding. When I saw that Pollock show, it was staggering. I must have felt, this is where I belong.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. Perfect. Okay, Jerry. So,
What's the next step? Oh,
so
Helen Frankenthaler, longtime
it was perfect.
It was perfect. There we go.
Okay, so here is young Helen Frankenthaler. She is 21 years old. She's in New York City, and she is starting to meet, and she is aggressively pursuing the artists that she's only heard about. Number one, Arshio Gorky, who of course named himself after Achilles and after Gorky, the writer. I can't pronounce his original name, but he was Armenian American, but a phenomenal character and artist. And he was a bridge between the surrealists and the cubists and the American abstract expressionists. And he was revered and died very tragically young. And next to him there is Bill de Kooning, wearing a tie, looking very, very formal. I would just say Gorky, they called him the Picasso of Washington Square, and he had a seminal influence on American abstract expression, on global abstract expressionism. Next slide. So here are the royalty. You've got Bill and Elaine de Kooning,
Oh,
who.
you might want to see this, Jack.
So you have to mute yourself. So Bill and Elaine de Kooning, who were sort of the reigning king and queen, and she was a force. You know, she was very talented, but she really subordinated her talent, as happens so often, to promoting the interest of William de Kooning. But they worked together for years, went through a separation, and then were back together. And she was a powerhouse and widely respected by herself in the New York school. Next to them is Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock. Lee Krasner, you know, went as far back as any and extremely talented, but once again, believed, as did many, that Jackson Pollock was the greatest painter alive and dedicated herself to promoting him. Next. On the left, you can see Pollock and Lee Krasner sitting amidst his paintings. He's just about to launch in New York City with his first show at Betty Parsons, which caused a revolution. But there, and that picture is sort of telling, he's looking down, he's kind of a rugged guy, and he could be really difficult when he drank too much, which became more and more frequent until he was killed in a car crash in 1956. And there's Lee Krasner sitting, looking up at him. On the right is Lee Krasner in front of one of her paintings, a famous painting called The Seasons, that she painted in 1957, a year after his death. Next. On the left is one of the iconic paintings of William de Kooning. It's untitled. I do believe there's a woman in there somewhere. And to the right is Elaine de Kooning. Fascinating. She was also an abstract painter who found her way to portrait painting in her own way, based on her own intuition and ability to really see into a character. And she loved it. And she gets commissioned to do John F. Kennedy, the official portrait. She spends 2 years working on this with hundreds of portraits. And when she is just about to meet with him to finalize the work, you can guess what date that was, in late November 1963, 2 days after he was assassinated. And that project never saw fruition, but that's Elaine de Kooning with her really amazing project to paint the president. Next. Helen was extremely close to David Smith, as were many in the community. He was also loved and of great influence. He was the most prominent sculptor. As we'll see, Frank O'Hara was the poet. There were characters that really filled the New York school. It wasn't just painters, it was sculptors, it was poets, it was dance, Merce Cunningham, it was music, John Cage, But David Smith was really important. And here he is with her in front of her iconic mountains and sea. Next. Also critically important, and a personal favorite, is on the left, Hans Hofmann, who was not only a great painter, but his ability as a painter was really overshadowed by his strength as a teacher. And virtually all of the New York school, first generation, second generation, came through his classes. They all crowded into his classes. Helen Frankenthaler went for 3 weeks in Provincetown and really felt that she learned really what it was to be an artist and how to live within a painting. Next to him is Frank O'Hara. He was a wonderful poet and a great influence to many of the artists. He was very close to Grace Hardigan more than anyone, but also to Helen. He was a curator at MoMA. And in fact, at Helen Frankenthaler's 1960 retrospective, he wrote the catalog for her. And it's really a beautiful piece of work. And so that's Frank O'Hara. Next. So let's go back again with Helen. On the left, she's there with her 3 sisters, her mother, Martha, on the right, sort of arranged that they all would be in sort of in black together. There's Helen graduating from Bennington and here celebrating with her mother. She looks a little concerned and her mother does too. That may define the relationship they had, although it was a great tragedy when her mother committed suicide. Several years later, she had Parkinson's and Helen was traumatized by it. Even more so, when she was 11 years old, the father that doted on her that we saw in the film earlier also died, and she was really lost for a period of years, even at that early age. Next. Helen is in New York. She's 21. She's with her friend Gabby Rogers, and they go to the artist costume ball at the Hotel Astor in 1950. She is asked by Bennington to organize an exhibition of painters that were Bennington graduates in New York City. She does so, and in her style, she decides to invite all of the most important critics in the city, and none was more important than Clement Greenberg. She invites him, and he comes, and he sees the show. He doesn't really like anything he sees. In particular, he doesn't like this painting, Woman on a Horse, so derivative of the Cubists and nothing original. He doesn't like it at all. And Helen tells him, well, that's mine. Well, he doesn't like the painting, but he likes Helen. And instead of taking the painting home, he takes Helen home. For her, it marks the beginning of an amazing period of 5 years relationship with Clement Greenberg. He's 19 years older than her. He adores her. She is, I think, smitten with him, certainly in the beginning, although he turns out to be really nasty and from time to time and drunk and not what she was looking for. But for 5 years, he introduced her to the world of art, theater, museums, galleries. And not only did they go, but he would share with her his insights, his critical assessment of everything they saw. And it was just an extraordinary opportunity, like a postgraduate school for Frankenthaler. Next. Among those that he introduced her to first was the royalty, Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock. You see Helen Frankenthaler, she looks like she's 16 there, but she's there with Clement. Clement is a fervent supporter and promoter of Jackson Pollock. He launches Jackson Pollock and makes sure that the world knows that he is the second coming. And Helen Frankenthaler also is blown away when she sees his drip paintings. Next. She sees his drip paintings. She's knocked out by them, but she has no intention of following what he is doing, except in one way. She wants to paint on the floor, but in her own way, and she launches what becomes known as soak and stain. Yeah, could you play it, Jerry?
I first saw Jackson Pollock's paintings at a show he had at Betty Parsons in the fall of '50. And I think what I particularly responded to was that there was an all at once, overall, this happened quality to it. I had to develop my own technique, but I think technique determines aesthetic as much as one's aesthetic determines a new medium. I don't want a border or line or strip all the way. The making of them, controlling them, and the surprise from them is a gesture that I do best.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Next, I don't know if anybody noticed the glass of cognac in her hand while she was painting, which I guess was, aided her creative initiative. So here she is, 1952. Here's Jackson Pollock in Long Island in 1929. They both had sort of a balletic quality as they sort of danced around, or in his case, he more often stormed around, but they both were painting on the floor. He with his famous drip and drop, she with her pour, soak, and stain. And 1952 is when she paints her masterpiece, her first masterpiece, called Mountains and Sea, which is next. And Mountain and Sea, which is one of the treasured pieces at the National Gallery in Washington, was painted on a large canvas, almost 12 feet by 9 feet. It was on an unprimed canvas. She uses some structure in there. You can see some drawing, which she always has, but the paint found its way in an interesting way to represent or resemble a landscape in a sense, even though she wasn't intending it. It was almost intuitive or magical, she would say. This was after a visit she made to Nova Scotia. Jerry, and this painting triggered what became known as color field painting, which people regarded as the bridge between Pollock and the next thing, which really dominated the 60s, called color field painting. Next, Jerry.
We're in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., looking at a large canvas by Helen Frankenthaler called Mountains and Sea.
And it dates to 1952.
Frankenthaler is reported to have recently gone to Cape Breton in northern Nova Scotia, where the mountains really do meet the sea. And we can make out a blue horizon line on the right side of the canvas. But when we look at the center of the canvas or the left side, this is abstract painting.
Abstract art emerges in the United States in the late 1940s, early 1950s with artists artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman, artists who are interested in expressing ideas through color, through gesture. And we see that here, but we see a different kind of application of paint.
One of the great champions of abstract expressionism was a critic whose name is Clement Greenberg. And Greenberg loved the way that people like Pollock seemed to be pushing ideas that had developed in the late 19th century with people like Cézanne, and then early in the 20th century with artists like Matisse, to an even greater level of abstraction. Pollock was willing to give up reference to specific elements in the world. He was painting about the act of painting.
Or so Greenberg theorized. Greenberg is seeing this development toward an interest in the materials, the paint and the canvas, getting away from the illusionism that Western art was about for hundreds of years.
And believed that art would be at its strongest if it was truthful about what it was. What Frankenthaler develops in this canvas is the idea that she can stain the canvas, that the paint becomes almost like fresco embedded within the weave of the material.
As soon as we make a mark on a canvas, our brains interpret that as a figure that sits on it. How do you deny that illusion that our brain immediately jumps to?
But Frankenthaler is not trying to enact Clement Greenberg's theories here. It's her direct response to the canvas.
And to the landscape, to the mountains and the sea of Cape Breton.
It is clearly a landscape at the right side, and then that completely falls apart.
We read the sea and the horizon line and the blue at the right, but then this vertical form that rises toward the center, tapers off toward the left, almost like a giant pyramid, looks as though it moves toward us instead of mountains receding in space.
At the same time, this charcoal line that is emphatically a drawing on the canvas.
And those lines feel very biomorphic to me, very organic. And so it makes it even harder, I think, to read a mountain there.
And then there are fields of color that are also amorphous, that dissolve and pool, paint that has been thinned and poured into the canvas itself.
And sometimes the color of that stain is indistinguishable or very close to the color of the canvas underneath it. And you expect the staining of the paint to follow those charcoal lines, but they seem very much independent of one another. And there are places where the paint is clearly splashed on, other places where it's pooled, and where you can see at the edges it's a little bit thicker because it sat there longer.
This painting is celebrated because it is the first painting of a group of artists, Morris Louis, Kenneth Noland, and Helen Frankenthaler, that would use staining as a technique to create this embedded, intentional two-dimensionality.
And to me, what that does is, in some ways, remove that sense of the presence of the artist, which is so clear in paintings by Jackson Pollock or Willem de Kooning. You don't get that sense of gesture that you do with those abstract expressionists, although we do have that in the drawing and the splashes of the paint.
You use the word biomorphic to refer to the shapes here, and that's a reminder of the biomorphism that was a part of surrealism earlier in the century. The work, for instance, of Miro or Arshio Gorky, allowing the unconscious to directly express itself on the canvas.
We can see this as an intuitive response to the landscape, almost involving the unconscious without representing factually the mountains and the sea.
We go back to this important early painting by Helen Frankenthaler because it is such a brave intersection of all of these conflicting issues and ideas.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jerry. Oh, God, I want to go see that. So next, yes. So while Helen is having her coming out party, she has two colleagues who are part of the second generation small contingent of women. You have Lee Krasner and Elaine de Kooning, who are the seniors, the first generation. These three are the new generation: Grace Hartigan, Helen Frankenthaler, and Joan Mitchell. And Life magazine in 1957 assigns them a hierarchical position in the modern art world, women artists in ascendance. And for each of them, it is an opportunity for them to be more widely known. They're all very active painting, but it's Frankenthaler that achieves the most significant renown early because of Mountains and Sea. Next. Here is, I found it interesting. They are in the left at Helen's first solo exhibition at the Tibor Denegi Gallery in New York. And they all seem to be really happy celebrating Helen. The one to the right, they're sort of happy, but Joan Mitchell doesn't look too happy. And in fact, she wasn't happy. And she called Helen's paintings Kotex paintings, which, isn't a very nice thing to say about your friend's work. Next. So I thought we would look at three different areas in the balance of this presentation, looking at her paintings, which are oil and acrylic, in both cases thinned, the oils with turpentine, the acrylic with water, so that they're very thin applications, almost like watercolor. Then we're going to look at her paintings on paper, which are almost all acrylic thinned with water, where her paper paintings were very significant, and she painted all through her career. And then we're going to look at her woodcuts, which revolutionized the way woodcuts were done. And so we have in her painting, in her paper, and in her woodcuts, she, in each case, brought innovation that was extraordinary and continued to be productive for 6 decades. So this first painting, 1950, is sort of a bridge. She's coming out of college, where she's been under the spell of Picasso and Miro and Kandinsky and Gorky, and that's what this looks like. Next. She then paints in 1952, Mountains and Sea, which knocks the art world out, and then further at the same time shows Scene with Nude, which also blows people's minds, and because right there in the middle is pubic hair and red and all kinds of stuff going on there, and it was like a bombshell when she showed this painting with Mountains and Sea. At this time, she also broke up with Clement Greenberg, and it is while she was with him and then right after that she produced some of her most powerful work. Next. The next one is Eden, very iconic. Again, the same thing. This is thinned oil, soak and stain. It's odd. It's a very strange painting. There's this exaggerated symmetry, 100 on each side. There's a hand that may be saying stop. There's a strange figure. To me, it looks like an alien, but again, something that stopped people in their tracks, and also for its size. It was 9 by 10, so it was a huge painting, as were all of hers in this period, and she was in part responsible for elevating the scale of paintings, especially among her fellow women artists. Next, this is Giralda, oil on an unprimed canvas. Again, a large painting. This, we think, may be referring to the bell tower in the Seville Cathedral, but a beautiful piece that, again, shows her instinct for color, but also for structure, sort of containing this. Next. 7 types of ambiguity. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. Poets, especially poets in the 50s, led by Frank O'Hara, this was their text. It was a book by William Empson, and it was a treatise on poetry entitled 7 Types of Ambiguity. And this is her painting. We have shapes floating in space. It looks like a heart with a sword through it. There looks like a 1 through 6 in there that might this probably suggests the 7 types of ambiguity. One so ambiguous we can't see it. In fact, we can't really see any of them too well. But this, again, is one of her iconic pieces. Next. And finally, we have the gorgeous Jacob's Ladder, which is on the left, which is at MoMA, owned by MoMA. And it's in a room that also features Krasner and de Kooning and Hartigan and Mitchell, and this by Frankenthaler. I'm the funny guy standing next to it, but it gives you a good idea of the scale and the beauty of that painting. And we're gonna look more at it now. But I would say before we look at the video about this piece, this painting, she submitted it at the Biennale in Paris, held at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris, and she won first prize for painting with this painting, Jacob's Ladder. Next. Here's video.
As a landscape painter that loves to work with big, bold brush strokes, I have a tendency to think that the more paint I put on the canvas, the better the painting is. This isn't the kind of painting I typically admire, and yet it no less stopped me in my tracks. And it was a real opportunity for me to just think more broadly about different ways you can actually make a successful work of art. My name is Alex Roediger, and I'm the Senior Information Coordinator at MoMA. This painting is Jacob's Ladder, painted by Helen Frankenthaler in 1957. Jacob's Ladder is a gorgeous, stunning, beautiful painting filled with big, colorful, soft, almost blurry shapes. One of the things I love most about working at MoMA is that all of the paintings here are just unbelievably amazing. They are often like the first of their kind. Very few people, if anyone, has made a work like this before. So when I take a tour of the galleries here, I am constantly being inspired and in awe of these totally new and innovative techniques that we see all around us. So that's always a source of inspiration for me as I continue my journey as a painter. Jacob's Ladder, which my understanding is a biblical reference to a ladder that descends from heaven down to earth. And I definitely feel that when I look at this painting, as you see the 2 vertical gestures here, as it rises up among all these energetic, colorful shapes and kind of releases us into this big, expansive, open space. All the colors are kind of a similar value, with largely complementary colors of red and green. But the further you look, you can also see all other colors in the spectrum, such as this wonderful violet, this yellow ochre. Frankenthaler would dilute her paint, allowing it to be absorbed into the unprimed canvas, thus creating these big, colorful shapes. And you see that the way when the paint has just kind of soaked into the canvas, that it has almost this sort of translucent feel where the color of the canvas is soaking right through. And in turn, the oil from the paint has soaked into the canvas, creating this kind of very subtle, delicate yellow color. I think there are no end to the ways that you can interpret the shapes here. Ultimately, this is an abstract painting. Personally, I see even a vase, and then up at the top, you can see several shapes that could be the heads of flowers and the petals sort of radiating out. There is no one right way to make a work of art. Abstraction can actually get more to the truth of things than painting every last little detail of a certain scene. It kind of bypasses maybe the more mundane details, but evokes just a real powerful sense of feeling. The sense of calmness I feel from this painting makes it no less dramatic. I think it's much more difficult and much more interesting to create art that both, as this painting does, hints at the darkness in life as well as points the way towards the light. Powerful things come in many different ways. They can come in the form of balance, simplicity, vulnerability. So for me to look at Jacob's Ladder is an example of a painting that just really allows me to stay open to the idea that there are many different and profound ways to express myself through painting.
Okay, Jerry, next.
As a landscape painter that loves to
Always.
big, bold brush strokes.
You're doing good, Jerry.
Thank you, David.
Hang in there. So, and I would encourage everybody, if they have a chance, to go see the group of artists that I mentioned that we're talking about, but most notably for me, that painting. It is spectacular. Okay, so she's painted that in 1957. She's had a fantastic run in the 50s. All of these paintings are not only going to be in the Jewish Museum in 1960, but retrospectives that she has in 1989 at MoMA and in 1998 at the Guggenheim. So, yeah, they're fantastic. We're going to look at some more paintings that she did, all again with the same approach to her work. But in 1958, she's meets Robert Motherwell. He is one of the first generation artists, one of the iconic painters, and he's recently divorced. He has 2 children, joint custody. He meets Helen, and they both fall in love and get married, like almost instantly. And this is a photograph of them on their wedding day. This is a painting next to it that Motherwell did of the wedding. I think it's one of the most cheerful paintings he ever did. Next, Jerry. They go on their honeymoon to Saint-Jean-de-Luz in France, and they travel to Spain to tour the Altamira cave. They do it by candlelight, very, very romantic and magical way to see the prehistoric paintings. And even before they go, and then they went to see paintings in Lascaux as well. And this is the bull from the Altamira cave on the right. Helen paints what she is imagining she's going to see. Next. So on the left is her painting called Before the Caves. So she sort of imagined what she's going to see in the caves, and this is her painting, and it's a large painting. It's almost 9 by 9. And she also paints at the same time Hotel Cro-Magnon, again, sort of emulating what she has seen, what she's later to see on the walls, but she calls it Hotel Cro-Magnon. And this is, inspired particularly by the Lascaux cave paintings that are 13,000 years old. Next. She's now stepmother with his shared custody of his 2 daughters, Lise and Jeannie. And it is not easy by any stretch, but she maintains a friendship with these 2 girls that become young women and are very supportive of her career, and especially Lise promotes her in the end, does shows, organizes exhibitions in her later years. The painting on the right, Mother Goose Melody, is inspired by them, by having children, a nursery rhyme. Mother Goose Melody was her sort of impression of that nursery rhyme and her kids. Again, a large piece, 9 by 7. Next, Jerry. So she, over the next 5 decades, let's see, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, she continues to paint oil on canvas, again thinned, and I'm just going to show examples of them. But what astonishes me is the high level of quality, of the consistency of her approach. And obviously it's coming from a creative impulse and a discipline in terms of her art that, it continues through 4 decades into her 80s. So this is Cool Summer, 1962. Next. This is Nature Abhors a Vacuum. This is in the National Gallery. I've seen this many times, never in person. Again, it's a 10 by 11 painting. I'm dying to see this, and I love the title. Not sure what it means, but what a spectacular painting. Next. This is 4EM. I don't know who that is. We were speculating earlier. Jerry believes it's E.M. Forrester, which I sort of like that idea. I'm not sure why it would be for him, but again, look at the way she manages, and that manages almost in a hands-off way, but manages the space, the color, the line for this magical composition. Next. This is called Sandstorm. This is now in the 90s. And again, so spectacular, this marriage of color in this painting. Again, a large painting, and with the same technique that we saw her demonstrating in 1952. And finally, in 2002, next, which I believe was the last painting, the last one that I saw, and now she is, well, she's, I guess, 75 here, called Cloudburst, acrylic on canvas, acrylic that's watered down, so it has that same watercolor feel to it and technique. Next. This next one, a little out of order. This was in 1967, but it's so extraordinary. She painted this after David Smith's death. And then when he died, she went into this manic episode, which included teaching and exhibiting and painting. And she painted this for the Montreal Expo in 1967, 30 feet by 16 feet. I have not been able to find a picture of it actually installed. You can see on the right, these guys setting it up, installing it, and you can imagine what it looked like. It was later moved to World Trade Center 2, where it was exhibited in 1977 and 1978. But I believe this was in some way homage to David Smith. Next. It's called Guiding Red. And that's Helen Frankenthaler standing by herself in front of the piece installed, so we can sort of get some idea of how powerful it was, and powerful, obviously, for her. So next. Next, we're going to look at works on paper. And here again, Frankenthaler had an enormous impact on the idea of working on paper until the 70s. It wasn't just her, but she made a huge contribution. Drawings and works on paper were considered less important. They were personal, they were casual, they were studies for larger work. They were difficult to exhibit, they were difficult to sell, they were hard to move logistically, they were hard to curate. Frankenthaler changes this. She does this extraordinary, and she does this for the rest of her career. This is 1951, oil on paper, again, thinned oil with charcoal on paper. This is small, but she gets much bigger soon. But again, an extraordinary piece, and one that, you know, will be influential in retrospect. Next. Here is getting a little larger. This is again called Shore Figure. This is diluted oil on paper with her same technique of staining the canvas. And, you know, the idea that these paintings were just as important and valuable as those on canvas was revolutionary. And she was a trailblazer that, and these pieces became hugely important to modern art. Rothko, by the way, also did hundreds, if not thousands, of works on paper that he signed, that I think are the subject of a big show, maybe at the National Gallery soon. But again, you see how gorgeous this is. Next. This is Frankenthaler painting on paper. This is paper, not canvas. It's called Canyon. She did it in 1965, so this is in the 60s. And she's doing it exactly the way she did her larger canvases, but this is paper. This is the thing that people thought was too difficult and that did not lend itself to scale. Well, she's showing that they were wrong. This is canvas 1965. Next, Jerry. Well, that's Canyon. That's the piece that we see her working on in the prior slide, sorry, which is just a beautiful, enormous painting on paper. Next. I love this piece. This is called Fiesta. When we did the article for Icon magazine, which I hope everybody takes, my friend Trina McKenna worked so hard to put that publication out. And if nothing else, the lead article every month is by Bob Beck, one of our great painters. And so you should pick it up. And I also have been given the opportunity to be the poet of the magazine, so you can see my page there too. But this was the cover of the issue that advertised the Frankenthaler presentation that we're participating in today. That's a gorgeous piece. Next. This is untitled, but a beautiful ethereal piece with, real depth to it. Again, on paper, but something that is as great a work of art as if it were on canvas. That was her view, and that was the view of a lot of people in the art community. And finally, next, Jerry, I love this. It's called Flirt. I'm not sure how, what, or why, but I love the piece, and it's also a large piece. It's 5 by 8. So this is one of her larger pieces. And next, and the last, and that was in the 90s. The last one, this one called Contentment Island, done in 2002, again, is one of the last of her paintings on paper. And she lives to 2011. So she's still working. But she's now moving into, although she started it in 74, this is the artist that can't stand still. She's moved into woodcuts. And that's the next section we're going to look at, where she truly revolutionized woodcuts and is known as a pioneer and an innovator that changed the art of woodcuts. So these two were her first forays into the medium of woodcuts. Her pursuit was how to achieve the same vibrant color and amorphous forms that she did achieve when she painted. And her pursuit of that resulted in a major technical innovation for this art form that changed it forever. Next. This is called Essence of Mulberry. This was an 8-color woodcut from 4 wood blocks. The challenge that she had was, and typically, and I have never done a woodcut, and I'm sure there's a number of you out there that have, so pardon me. But if I understand it, the artist is cutting thin sheets of plywood, maybe another kind of wood as well, separately inked shapes, and she devised a way to eliminate the lines, the white lines between them when printing, so that she could achieve the richness and completeness of as if it were a painting, if it were a whole piece. And apparently, this was such a profound departure that virtually all subsequent woodcuts have incorporated the thinking embodied in this. This is the essence of mulberry, and apparently she used the mulberry that was outside the studio where she was working. She used the juice into the color of the art. Again, expanding the possibilities of this medium. And this is also the first work that she did that she would continue to do with in her collaboration with Tyler Graphics, which she did really until within 2 years of her death, which we'll see. Next. This is a gorgeous painting, again, called Cedar Hill. I think it's pretty sizable, but I could not get the dimensions in time for this presentation, but she managed to achieve this effect of almost a pointillist textured consistency in the piece, which is, beautiful. Next. And here is a piece that's called Free Fall. You can see how large it is. This is a woodcut. Again, it sort of defies my imagination and technical understanding of how it's done, but you can see in the printing how large this is and how beautiful it is. That's called Free Fall. Here, next, Jerry. Here she is working with Bill Tyler, who runs the studio with whom she worked for years, as well as Yasuyuki Shibata, who also participated in a lot of the work, and both in subject and in the manner that it was created. She was very committed to using traditional Japanese techniques. The carving technology, pardon my lack of Japanese, I think is ukiyo-e carving technique, but with it she succeeds in creating what is seemingly a full realization of her soak and stain approach to painting, as we'll see in the next piece, which is her masterpiece called Madame Butterfly. This piece, involving 102 color woodcuts from 46 wood blocks, again, sizable. It's almost 4 feet by 8 feet. Next, Jerry will have a video from the Dulwich Gallery, which has just had a recent show.
Helen Frankenthaler, Radical Beauty, is the first time UK audiences can encounter 36 of Frankenthaler's woodcut prints together. It reveals her as a trailblazer of the printmaking movement who broke countless barriers through her experimentation. Madame Butterfly is her woodcut print masterpiece. It's her in full flow, owning the medium that she had transformed. While we typically think of woodcut printmaking as rigid surface, harsh lines, and static shape, Madame Butterfly, with its soft, delicate forms, is far from this. It's a radical work of dizzying beauty that can take your breath away. Frankenthaler was continually striving to make art that felt like it happened in the moment. But for all this spontaneity in Madame Butterfly, it was a multi-step, collaborative, and risky work to create. It took 2 years to complete, working alongside master printmaker Kenneth Tyler and woodcarver Yasuyuki Shibata. Speed was crucial in the printing process. Both ink and paper had to be kept wet so the colors would run and blend. Many different proofs were made in a trial and error process. And as we can see here in this working proof, Frankenthaler would cut proofs apart and stick them back together in new ways, like a collage to create the final image she wanted to achieve. The final work, made up of 42 wood blocks, 3 handmade papers, and 102 colors, transcends the possibility of woodcut prints. Madame Butterfly hides the incredible technical innovation behind it. And for me, it's work that demands your time. I find I see, hear, and feel something different each time I look at it. The sense of ambiguity offers us as viewers the space to create our own meaning.
Next, thank you, Jerry. Yo, sorry, I missed that show.
Sorry.
Helen?
It was actually worth seeing again. So this is a woodcut that she did in 2004. So this is, she starts in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000. Again, a gorgeous piece called Snow Pines. And finally, the last woodcut that she did, next, Jerry, which I think is among her most beautiful at 80, called Weeping Crabapple. And it looks to me, it looks like it could have been done by that breakout artist, that young woman of 23 years old in 1952. What a gorgeous piece. Next. So to conclude my hour, this is Frankenthaler in front of one of her pieces. I love this picture. And I want to conclude with a quote from Clement Greenberg, who oddly enough never reviewed any of Frankenthaler's shows. Maybe he felt prejudiced or because of his past relationship, but this is what he said about her. He found in her paintings a searching quality that emanated from an Innerlichkeit, Yiddish for an inwardness, that created abstractions animated by an energy, by colors that filled the whole of her canvases. And that was to characterize her for the 6 decades that she worked actively as one of our greatest artists. That's Helen Frankenthaler. So thank you very much.
And thank you.
So happy if anybody has any questions.
Hi, David. Sharon wanted. Why did she switch from oil paints to acrylic? When did she do that? All of a sudden I saw acrylic and she had started out in oil paints.
I think that she found it, I don't really know. I think she found it easier to use, but, I think the idea of using acrylics and watering them down was easier and, as effective for her.
And quicker.
And quicker. And that occurred really in the 70s, it looks like to me.
Can I have another question?
Yeah.
On the wood blocks, did she only do one print? Because usually a wood block is a series of prints with an artist proof. And I couldn't quite see close enough to see if there were more than one print.
Great question. As you can see with Madame Butterfly, she did multiple prints because she kept trying different things.
Right.
I don't know, given an artist of her stature, she wasn't doing this to sell prints.
Right.
She was doing this to create iconic work that would, thrill viewers for time immemorial. So I don't know if she made.
Well, the artist proof is usually worth more.
Yeah.
I have a
That's
question.
a great question. I don't know.
I have a question also. I'm familiar with the term monoprints, where there's art done on a surface and then you get a print from that. And that's what it seemed to be more like.
Yeah, but it was.
I didn't see any evidence of actual cuts.
Yeah, but they were there. I mean, they were cutting, absolutely cutting the wood blocks and cutting, many different shapes out of the wood that they kept applying, that kept getting printed upon. But again, I apologize for my ignorance of the actual process. But the result blows my mind. I'm not sure how we got there. And I'm curious. Yeah.
I was wondering where she got her art education mainly. Did she
So-
ever get to Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts?
She
Or was
did
it all
not,
in New
as
York?
far as I know, but her initial education, first of all, apparently she was drawing and she was inclined to art and encouraged by her parents from the age 7, where they really saw this technique. And one of the things that she did, apparently, they lived on the Upper East Side, is she took chalk and took that chalk and ran it for like 18 blocks without stop, through sidewalks, intersections, through passersby, no matter what, she was drawing this line. And when she went to the Dalton School, which obviously for the wealthy, for the wealthy, she had Rufino Tamayo, one of the greatest artists. of
Tamayo
all
from
time.
Mexico. From Mexico, right? Yeah,
Who
sure.
was a Cubist,
Right.
but was extraordinary. And she said she learned from him what it meant to be an artist, and he took her under his wing. And I think I mentioned that when she won first prize at the Biennale in Paris in 1960, he was one of the judges.
Wow.
So, and then she went to Bennington, and Paul Feely, who was also not only a terrific painter, but a great teacher, and somebody that she stayed friendly with for the whole of her and his life, and spent a lot of time socializing, and he followed her career. So she obviously had an impact on everyone that she studied with, including Hans Hofmann. Even though it was a short period of time, he saw also her extraordinary talent.
Yeah, she was extraordinary. No doubt about it. Did
Yeah.
she ever get up to what is the place up in near Truro up in off
On the
the
Cape.
Provincetown and all? Was
She
she involved in that?
She spent many, many summers. That's where she and Motherwell stayed.
Oh,
And so, yes, she was, and she did many paintings of the, Provincetown. I didn't include them, and they're all beautiful.
you don't
But-
hear about that now, about artists there at all. You know, it just
Yeah.
doesn't seem to
It's
be in the
changed.
realm. It was that period of time.
It was, and that's where
Wow.
Hoffman had his school, and
Yeah.
then also on the east end of, on Long Island in the Hamptons, that's where Jackson Pollock and Krasner and, that gang, and Motherwell. So
This is, yeah, great.
it
Great
was
series.
an amazing time for American art, especially
Oh,
that
really?
decade of 1950 to 1959.
No doubt about it. It was amazing. Is most of her work in MoMA in their collection? I noticed Crystal Bridges was mentioned.
Yeah, it's
For
all
a
over
couple
the
of
world.
them, because she's really gathered up a lot, but I didn't know which museums might have, where it's mostly.
I think probably the National Gallery in Washington. MoMA, I only saw one of her pieces. There may be more, but I only saw the one that I was going to see, which was Jacob's Ladder.
Right.
Which is
Amazing.
really, it's an amazing piece.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for this
Yes.
wonderful series.
Yes, indeed. What's interesting is like Louise Nevelson and Helen did not have children of their own, right?
Right.
They were, they were artists. And this is back in the 50s, when they were definitely ahead of their time. I don't know how these women sprang forth from the head of a Zeus, but she passed away. She passed away already, right?
Oh, yeah, she died at 83 in 2011. And I would say Nevelson did have a child.
Oh, she did. Okay.
But he was, she was pretty absent as a mother with great regret. And Frankenthaler reflected on this a bit, and this was a choice that she made. She didn't feel that she could be a mother and an artist at the same time. This was, art was all consuming. And I think that is true for many artists, but it's a real difficult choice for women. I mean, look at de Kooning. Elaine de Kooning didn't have children. Lee Krasner didn't have children. They were consumed with their art and that decade, which was, I feel it was almost frenzied. They were going in and out of each other's studios and going to shows and exhibitions, and it was all very exciting.
Absolutely. How come it's called Color Field? Is it just her technique of like watering down her paints and making okay.
Correct, where the color really defines the painting.
I mean, did she influence Rothko, or did Rothko influence her?
It's a great question, because he also was Color Field, although he got pretty dark by the end, but they both were extraordinary in their use of color to define their art. And they obviously knew each other, although interestingly, in all my reading, I didn't really find that they interacted in particular, although I think it's a real interesting question. I didn't focus on it.
Oh, no problem.
But
Thank
they
you.
also both did not only painting, but they painted on paper more than almost any of the other artists, and it was important to them. So interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. By the way, if there, I don't know if there are more questions, but I want to say a particular hello to my mother. I hope she's still watching. And I also want to thank Jerry for her yeoman duty of trying to, follow my shenanigans for these 4 presentations. Thank you, Jerry.
And thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon helped.
Thank you very
Smith.
much.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good.
Great, David.
Thank
So
you.
wonderful,
It's
David.
great.
Thank you so much.
Are there any more lectures to come?
I think we're going to take the summer off and
Okay.
then we may start up again in the fall.
We hope so.
Wonderful, just terrific. They've been just
Fabulous.
outstanding.
Yes.
Thank
And,
you so
well,
much.
listen, I love doing it.
I can
And
tell.
by the way, even though it's painful at times, because you're reading books like this that are 700 pages.
Oh my gosh.
And I would recommend this, by the way,
Yeah.
if you have, a lifetime.
Ninth Street Women.
9th Street Women. It's an
Wow.
amazing book. But yeah, it's been a lot of hard work. But then again, it's what a benefit to learn so much about these extraordinary artists and their work. And
It
what,
is.
I don't know if there's another way to do it without other than total immersion.
Oh, wow, great. Thank you so much.
Off to Provincetown.
Yeah, up there this summer.
Good night, all.
Oh, good.
Thank
you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.